My son thought my silence was senility. He thought my trembling hands were a sign of weakness, of a mind fading into the fog of age. He did not know my hands were shaking with a rage so cold it could freeze the rain falling outside my Seattle home. He and his wife spent months planning to steal the house I built, with my own two hands, the home where I raised him. They thought they had won. But they forgot one thing. I was a structural engineer for 40 years. I know how to spot a crack in a foundation, and I know exactly where to place the charge to bring the whole rotten structure down. At 2 a.m., while they slept off the champagne from celebrating their theft, I sat in the dark and transferred the deed. You will not believe what happened when they tried to sell my house the next morning. But before I tell you how I dismantled their lives with a single click, please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful child a lesson they would never forget. My name is Gerald Sullivan. I am 69 years old, and until 3 days ago, I thought I had a family. It started on a Tuesday, a morning that was gray and drizzly, typical for the Pacific Northwest. I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee, enjoying the silence of the house. This house is my pride. 4 bedrooms, a view of the Sound, paid off 5 years ago, after decades of sweating over blueprints and site inspections. It is worth nearly $2 million now, but to me it is just the place where my wife Patricia and I danced in the living room. I saw a red dot dance across the kitchen wall. At first I thought it was a reflection from a passing car. Then the dot moved to the cabinets, then to my chest. I stood up and walked to the French doors that led to the backyard. There was a man standing in my garden. He was wearing a cheap, shiny suit that looked soaked in the mist, and he was holding a laser measuring tool. He was pointing it at my house, measuring the exterior walls. I opened the door. The cold, damp air hit my face. I asked him what he thought he was doing. He did not even look startled. He just glanced at a clipboard and wrote something down. He told me to step aside because he needed to get the dimensions of the patio for the listing. I felt a pulse of confusion in my temple. I told him he had the wrong address. I told him this house was not for sale. The man finally looked at me. He had the eyes of a shark that smells blood in the water. He gave me a pitying smile, the kind you give to a confused child or a broken machine. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document. He told me that according to the paperwork, the listing was active as of this morning. He said the owner requested an expedited sale. I told him I was the owner. I told him to get off my property before I called the police. The man sighed as if I were wasting his valuable time. He handed me a photocopy of a document. It was a power of attorney. It authorized Brandon Sullivan to make all financial and real estate decisions on behalf of Gerald Sullivan due to incapacitation. And at the bottom of the page there was a signature. My signature. I stared at the ink. I am a structural engineer. My entire career was built on precision. I know my signature like I know the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam. I looked at the loop of the G. It was too wide. The slant of the S was off by perhaps 5 degrees. The pressure on the paper was uneven, heavy at the start, and trailing off at the end, as if the person writing it was hesitant. It was a forgery. It was a good one, but to my eyes it was a structural failure. The man in the suit told me that my son, Mr. Brandon, had explained the situation. He said Brandon warned him that I might be difficult. He said Brandon told him I was suffering from early-stage dementia, and that I often forgot major life events. He told me not to worry, that the transition to the assisted living facility would be smooth. The world tilted on its axis. Dementia, assisted living. My son had not just forged my signature. He had constructed a narrative where I was mentally incompetent. He had erased my agency. I looked at the man in the suit. I did not shout. I did not throw a punch, though I wanted to. I simply folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I told him to leave. I told him if he was still on my lawn in 30 seconds, I would turn the sprinklers on. He laughed, shook his head, and walked away, probably thinking I was having an episode. I went back inside. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from a chemical reaction in my blood. It was the adrenaline of a man who realizes there is an intruder in the house, only the intruder shares his last name. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. I knew they would be coming. Brandon and his wife, Monica. They arrived an hour later. I heard the front door unlock. They still had keys. I had never changed the locks because I trusted them. That was my first mistake. I heard their voices before I saw them. They were laughing. It was a light, airy sound, the sound of people who believe they have won the lottery. They walked into the kitchen and stopped when they saw me. I was sitting in the dark, the unlit coffee cup still on the table. I threw the crumpled photocopy of the power of attorney onto the center of the table. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. I asked them what this was. Brandon is 38 years old. He has always been a boy who wanted the corner office without doing the work. He calls himself a tech entrepreneur, but in reality he jumps from one failed startup to another, funding his lifestyle with loans he never pays back. He looked at the paper, and for a second, I saw the fear of a child caught with his hand in the jar. But then he looked at Monica, and his face hardened. Monica is different. She is a realtor. She knows the market. She knows the laws. And she has the eyes of a calculator. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Brandon's arm, steadying him. She told me not to be dramatic. She said they were going to tell me tonight over dinner. I asked them if they were going to tell me they forged my signature over meatloaf. I asked them if they were going to tell me they were selling my home while passing the potatoes. Brandon snapped. The guilt turned into aggression instantly. He shouted that I didn't know what I was doing. He said I was an old man rattling around in a 4-bedroom house like a ghost. He said the property tax alone was a waste of resources. He said his company needed a bridge loan, just a temporary injection of capital to go public, and that my house was just sitting here doing nothing. He said it was selfish of me to hoard this equity when he was on the verge of greatness. I looked at him. I looked at the boy I taught to ride a bike. I looked at the man whose tuition I paid, whose legal bills I covered 3 years ago when he got sued for copyright infringement. $150,000. I never asked for it back. And now he stood there in my kitchen wearing a watch that cost more than my first car, telling me I was selfish. Monica took a different approach. She sat down opposite me. She used her soft professional voice, the one she uses to close deals with hesitant buyers. She told me the market in Seattle was peaking. She said if we didn't sell this week, we would lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. She said they had found a beautiful community for me in the suburbs. Luxury apartments, medical staff on site, meals included. She said I wouldn't have to worry about the lawn or the gutters ever again. I asked her where the money from the sale would go. I asked if it would go into my account. Monica paused. Just for a heartbeat. She said technically, as my power of attorney Brandon would manage the assets to ensure my care was paid for. The surplus would be invested in Brandon's company. There it was. They weren't just selling the house. They were liquidating my life to pay for his gambling addiction and disguised as business. They were going to put me in a warehouse for the dying and spend my retirement on leasing Porsches and playing CEO. I told them no. I told them I was not senile. I told them the signature was a fraud, and I would report it. Brandon laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. He walked over to the counter and poured himself a glass of water, making himself at home in the house he had just tried to steal. He told me it didn't matter what I said. He told me he had already filed the paperwork with the county. He told me that tomorrow, a doctor, a specialist Monica knew, was coming to perform a competency evaluation. He said I had been forgetting things lately. He said I left the stove on. He said I got lost driving to the store. I stared at him. I have never left the stove on in my life. I navigate this city better than the GPS. He was gaslighting me. He was building a file. Monica smiled a thin, tight expression. She said it was for my own good. She said I was agitated, which was a symptom. She said if I fought them, it would only prove I was unstable. She said the temporary power of attorney was already active because they had filed an emergency motion claiming I was a danger to myself. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt every year of my age, but my mind was sharpening. The engineer in me was waking up. When a building is under stress, you don't panic. You analyze the load paths. You find the failure points. I acted. I grabbed my chest. I let out a small gasp and slumped back into the chair. I let my hand tremble visibly. I mumbled something incoherent about Patricia, about my wife who has been dead for 5 years. I saw them exchange a look of triumph. See, Brandon whispered to her. He's losing it. The stress is triggering him. Monica nodded. She told him to let me rest. She said they would stay here tonight to keep an eye on me, to make sure I didn't hurt myself. They weren't staying to care for me. They were staying to guard the asset. They were occupying the territory. I shuffled to my bedroom, playing the part of the defeated old man. I closed the door. I heard them in the kitchen. They were opening a bottle of wine. My wine. A vintage Cabernet I had been saving for my 70th birthday. I heard the pop of the cork. It sounded like a gunshot. I sat on the edge of my bed. The room was dark. I looked at the photo of Patricia on the nightstand. She looked so happy in that picture taken in Italy. She had made me promise on her deathbed that I would look after Brandon. She knew he was weak. She knew he had a hollow space inside him that he tried to fill with money. She made me promise to help him. But she never asked me to let him destroy me. I waited until the house was quiet. I waited until the murmur of their voices and the clinking of glasses faded into the silence of sleep. I checked the time. It was 11 p.m. I needed to know the full extent of the damage. I needed to see the blueprints of their scheme. I opened my bedroom door. The hinge squeaked a sound that seemed deafening, but they were upstairs in the guest room, likely passed out. I walked softly down the hallway. I went to the kitchen. I picked up the landline receiver to call my lawyer, Leonard. There was no dial tone. The line was dead. I pulled the phone away from the wall. The cord had been cut, not unplugged. Cut. A clean slice with a pair of scissors. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. This was not just greed. This was containment. I went to the living room to check the modem. The lights were on, but when I tried to connect my tablet, the password had been changed. The network name was different. They had locked me out of the world. I was a prisoner in my own home. I crept down the stairs to the basement. This was where Brandon had set up his temporary office 6 months ago, when he said he needed a quiet place to work on his pitch deck. I had let him in. I had given him the code to the alarm. I had welcomed the viper into the nest. The basement was cold. The blue light of a computer monitor blinked in the corner. Brandon's laptop. He had left it in sleep mode. I sat down in his ergonomic chair. It smelled of his cologne, a heavy musky scent that tried too hard to be masculine. The computer was password protected. I looked around the desk. Sticky notes everywhere. Call investors. Launch date. Vinny, urgent. Vinny. The name stuck out. It was written in red ink, underlined twice. I looked at the password hint. First pet. I typed in Buster. Access granted. My son was not a genius. He was just arrogant. He thought he didn't need strong security because he thought he was smarter than everyone else. I opened his email. I didn't have to search far. The inbox was a disaster zone of overdue notices, angry investors, and final warnings. But there was one email thread that made my blood run cold. It was from a sender named Vinny Capital LLC. The subject line was 48 hours. I opened it. The text was short. "You are out of time, Sullivan. The interest on the $250K is compounding daily. You said the house was a sure thing. You said the old man was signing over the deed this week. If I don't see the title transfer by Friday, we aren't coming for the money. We are coming for your knees, and then we are coming for the house anyway." I scrolled down. There was an attachment. It was a loan agreement. A hard money loan. Predatory lending. Interest rates that should be illegal. And in the collateral section listed in black and white, 4208 Evergreen Terrace. My address. Brandon hadn't just forged a power of attorney. He had already leveraged the house. He had taken $250,000 from loan sharks, betting on the fact that he could force me out, sell the house, pay them back, and keep the rest. He wasn't selling the house to grow his company. He was selling the house to save his life. I sat back in the chair. The screen blurred for a moment. My son was in debt to criminals, and he had offered up his father's home as the sacrificial lamb. I heard a creak above me. Footsteps on the floorboards. They were awake. I quickly closed the browser windows. I put the computer back to sleep. I wiped the keyboard with my sleeve to remove fingerprints. I moved the chair back to its exact position. I climbed the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I made it back to my room just as I heard the bathroom door open upstairs. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The darkness felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I realized then that I was alone. I had no phone, no internet, no way to call the police without waking them. And even if I did, they had the paperwork. They had the narrative. My father is confused, officer. He's agitated. I thought about the next morning. They were bringing a doctor Monica knew. That meant the doctor was in on it. They were going to drug me or trick me or simply lie on the forms. Once that medical certification was signed, I was dead. Legally, I would cease to exist as a person. I would just be a ward of the state, and Brandon would be my keeper. I looked at the clock. 3:00 a.m. I could not sleep. My mind was racing, analyzing the variables. The loan shark, the forged signature, the doctor, the disconnected phone. I needed a way out. But I couldn't just run. If I ran, they would report me missing. They would tell the police I was a wandering dementia patient. The police would find me and bring me back, delivering me right into their hands. No, I couldn't run. I had to stand my ground. I had to fight, but I couldn't fight them with physical strength. Brandon was younger, stronger. I couldn't fight them with shouting matches. I had to fight them with the only thing I had left. My brain. I remembered something. A year ago, I had hired a young man to help me upgrade the insulation in the garage. His name was Sam. He was a brilliant kid, formerly IT, who got burned out and started doing handy work. We had talked for hours about networks, about security. He had set up a secondary hardwired internet line in the workshop behind the garage because the signal was weak out there. He had hidden the router in a cabinet because I didn't want the blinking lights to be visible. Brandon didn't know about the workshop line. Monica didn't know. They never went into the workshop. It was full of sawdust and old tools. To them, it was just a shed. I waited. The silence of the house returned. I waited until 4 a.m. I got out of bed. I put on my slippers. I moved like a ghost. I unlocked the back door. It made a soft click. I froze. Nothing. No movement from upstairs. I stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was freezing. I walked across the wet grass to the detached workshop. I opened the door. The smell of cedar and oil greeted me. It was the smell of sanity. I fumbled in the dark until I found the cabinet. I opened it. The router lights were blinking. Green. 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 I had a connection. I pulled an old laptop from a drawer. It was slow, dusty, but it worked. I booted it up. I connected to the hidden network. I had a window to the world. My first thought was to email Leonard Katz. Leonard is my attorney. He is 75 years old. He smokes cigars that smell like burning tires, and he is the nastiest, most brilliant shark in Seattle. He retired 2 years ago, but he kept me as a client because we play chess on Tuesdays. I drafted an email. Subject: urgent. Fraud. Brandon. I typed fast. My fingers, usually stiff with arthritis, flew across the keys. I explained everything. The stranger with the laser. The forgery. The cut phone lines. The loan shark email. The plan to commit me. I hit send. Then I realized something. Leonard wouldn't check his email until 8 a.m. By 8 a.m., the doctor might already be here. Monica said she wanted an early appointment. I needed insurance. I needed something that would stop them dead in their tracks, something that would strip them of their power instantly. I logged into the county assessor's website. I looked up my property. The deed was still in my name. They hadn't filed this transfer yet. They were waiting for the medical certificate to make it bulletproof. I logged into my bank. I have a secure portal for high-value transactions. I set it up years ago when I sold my consultancy firm. I sat there in the cold workshop, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. I looked at the digital representation of my life's work. The house, the savings. If I did nothing, they would take it all. If I called the police, it would be my word against theirs, and they had the concern of loving children. I needed to make the house radioactive. I needed to move it somewhere they couldn't touch it. I remembered a conversation with Leonard about estate planning. We had set up a dormant trust years ago, the Patricia Sullivan Memorial Trust. It was empty, just a shell we had created for tax purposes, but never funded. It was an irrevocable trust. Once assets go into an irrevocable trust, they belong to the trust. Not to me, not to my heirs. The trustee controls them. And the trustee was a third-party management firm Leonard controlled. If I transferred the house into the trust, I would no longer own it. I would just be a tenant. And if I didn't own it, Brandon couldn't sell it. The power of attorney would be useless because the asset it governed was gone. But there was a risk. Once I did this, I couldn't undo it easily. I would be signing away my property. I looked at the house through the workshop window, the dark silhouette of the roof against the night sky. My son was sleeping in there, dreaming of spending my money. I made my decision. I initiated the transfer. I filled out the digital deed forms. I uploaded my digital ID verification. I answered the security questions. What was the name of your first pet? Buster. I reached the final confirmation screen. Transfer title of 4208 Evergreen Terrace to Patricia Sullivan Memorial Trust. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was the nuclear option. This was burning the ships, so there was no retreat. I pressed the button. A loading bar appeared. Spinning. Processing. Transaction complete. Deed transfer recorded. Timestamp 4:14 a.m. I sat back. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 24 hours. It was done. I didn't own the house anymore, but neither did they. I shut down the laptop. I hid it back in the drawer. I walked back across the lawn. The grass was starting to shimmer with the first hint of dawn. I went back to bed. I pulled the covers up to my chin. I closed my eyes. For the first time all night, I smiled, because I knew what was coming. I knew that in a few hours, Monica would wake up. She would call her doctor friend. They would start their performance. They would think they were directing the play. They didn't know the theater had already burned down. I lay there and waited for the sunrise. I waited for the second act to begin. I was ready. The engineer had fortified the structure. Now I just had to wait for them to crash against the walls. The sun came up at 6:30 a.m. I heard the coffee grinder. They were awake. The door to my room opened. It was Monica. She was wearing a crisp white blouse and black slacks. She looked like a CEO. She was carrying a tray with coffee and toast. "Good morning, Dad," she said. Her voice was syrup. "I brought you breakfast in bed. We have a big day today. A friend of mine is coming to check on you. Just a routine checkup." I sat up. I looked at her. I put on my best confused old man face. "Thank you, dear," I said. "That's very kind. Who is your friend, Dr. Ellis?" she said. "He specializes in memory care." "Memory," I repeated. "My memory is fine, Monica." "Of course it is," she said, patting my hand. "Just humor us. Eat your toast." She left the room. I looked at the toast. I didn't touch it. I didn't know what was in it. I got dressed. I put on my favorite cardigan. I wanted to look harmless. At 8:00 a.m., the doorbell rang. I heard deep voices in the hall. I walked out into the living room. There were two men. One was Dr. Ellis, a man with a sweaty forehead and a nervous tick in his eye. The other man I didn't recognize. He was big, wearing a leather jacket. He looked out of place in my living room. Brandon was there, looking pale. He was checking his phone constantly. He was waiting for the money. "Dad," Brandon said, "this is Dr. Ellis, and this is Mr. Vinny." My heart stopped. Vinny, the loan shark. He wasn't just sending emails. He was here. He was here to collect. Brandon had invited the wolf into the house to watch the sheep get slaughtered. "Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Ellis said, opening his bag, "why don't you have a seat? I just want to ask you a few questions. Simple things. What year is it? Who is the president?" I looked at Vinny. He was leaning against the wall, chewing on a toothpick. He was looking at the furniture, appraising it. I looked at Brandon. He was sweating. "It is 2024, I said clearly. "The president is—" I named him. "And my son is currently trying to commit fraud." The room went silent. Monica laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "See, doctor, he's agitated. He's paranoid. He thinks everyone is against him." Dr. Ellis nodded. "Paranoia is a common symptom. Mr. Sullivan, please sit down. I need to take your blood pressure." "You are not touching me," I said. "And you," I pointed at Vinny, "get out of my house." Vinny laughed. He took the toothpick out of his mouth. "Feisty. I like it. But Brandon here says this is his house, or it will be by noon." "He lied to you," I said. Brandon stepped forward. "Dad, stop it. You're embarrassing yourself. Just sign the papers. Dr. Ellis will certify you, and we can handle everything. We'll take care of the debt. We'll take care of you." "There is no debt," I said. "Not mine, anyway." "Sign the papers," Brandon shouted. The mask slipped. The desperate boy came out. "Sign them, or I swear to God I will have them drag you out of here in a straitjacket." I looked at him. I saw the fear. I saw the greed. I saw the stranger he had become. "I can't sign the house over to you, Brandon," I said softly. "Why not?" he screamed. "Because you're stubborn, because you're selfish." "No," I said, "because I don't own it." They froze. Monica frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Of course you own it. I pulled the title report yesterday." "Check it again," I said. Monica pulled out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen. She logged into the county database. I watched her face. I watched the color drain out of it. I watched her mouth open. "What is it?" Brandon asked. "Monica, what is it?" It's not his," she whispered. "The owner is listed as the Patricia Sullivan Memorial Trust." "What?" Brandon grabbed the phone. "That's impossible. When was it transferred?" Today, Monica said. Her voice was trembling. Timestamp. 4:14 a.m. And they both looked at me. The realization hit them. I wasn't senile. I wasn't asleep. I was awake. And I was 5 steps ahead. The house belongs to the trust, I said. And the trust is managed by a corporate trustee. I am just a tenant. I have a lifetime lease for $1 a year. I cannot sell it. I cannot mortgage it. And neither can you. Vinny pushed off the wall. He walked over to Brandon. He put a heavy hand on my son's shoulder. Brandon, Vinny said. His voice was low, like gravel in a mixer. You told me the house was collateral. You told me the equity was mine. It was, Brandon stammered. He tricked me. He did this to screw me. I don't care about your daddy issues, Vinny said. I care about my $250,000. The house is gone. So where is my money? I can fix this, Brandon said. He looked at me. Dad, undo it. Transfer it back. You have to. Vinny isn't playing. I can't, I said. It's an irrevocable trust. That means exactly what it says. It cannot be revoked. Not by me. Not by you. Not by anyone. You killed me, Brandon whispered. You just killed me. No, I said. You killed yourself when you bet my life on your failures. Just then, sirens wailed in the distance. They were getting closer. I had forgotten to mention one thing in my email to Leonard. I had told him to send the police. I had told him there were intruders in my home. Monica ran to the window. Cops, Brandon, the cops are here, Vinny cursed. He looked at the back door. This isn't over, kid, he said to Brandon. You owe me, and I always collect. Vinny ran for the back door. He didn't know about the high fence. He didn't know the police were already surrounding the perimeter. Brandon sank to his knees. He put his head in his hands. I stood there in my cardigan, watching the empire of lies crumble. The doorbell rang again. This time it wasn't a doctor. It was the heavy pounding of law enforcement. I walked to the door. I opened it. Mr. Sullivan, the officer asked. Yes, I said. I'm Gerald Sullivan, and I would like to report a case of elder abuse, attempted fraud, and I believe there is an armed loan shark in my backyard. The officer's eyes went wide. I looked back at Brandon. He was sobbing on the floor. Monica was frantically deleting things from her phone. I took a sip of the coffee Monica had brought me earlier. It was cold, but it tasted like victory. This was just the beginning. I had saved the house, but I still had to bury them, and I had plenty of dirt left to throw. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of my living room, casting long, pale shadows across the floorboards I had installed 20 years ago. To anyone looking in, it was a peaceful Seattle morning. To me, it was the opening act of a play where I was forced to perform for my life. I sat in my favorite armchair, the leather worn soft by decades of use, and waited. I had dressed carefully for the occasion. I chose a cardigan with a missing button and mismatched socks. I let my hair remain uncombed. If they wanted a confused old man, I would give them a performance worthy of an Academy Award. My heart was beating with a steady rhythmic thrum, not out of fear, but out of a cold, calculating anticipation. I had spent the last few hours since my discovery in the basement, fortifying my mind. I was no longer just a father or a grandfather. I was a structural engineer facing a critical failure in the building's integrity, and I had to contain the damage before the collapse. I heard the heavy tread of Brandon's footsteps on the stairs, followed by the click-clack of Monica's heels. They were moving with a new energy today, a nervous excitement that vibrated through the house. The smell of burnt toast drifted from the kitchen, a domestic scent that felt wrong, like air freshener sprayed over a crime scene. Monica entered the living room first. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer and holding a clipboard. She looked less like a daughter-in-law and more like a project manager inspecting a demolition site. She didn't say good morning. She just checked her watch and looked out the window. "He is here," she announced, her voice tight. "Brandon, get the door." Brandon walked past me, avoiding my eyes. He looked pale, likely from the hangover of his premature celebration the night before, or perhaps from the looming deadline of his debts. I watched him open the front door to reveal a man who looked like he had been assembled from spare parts of other sleazy professionals. This was Dr. Thorne. I knew it the moment I saw him. He wasn't the kind of doctor who worked in a sterile hospital with bright lights. He was the kind of doctor who made house calls for cash and signed prescriptions without asking questions. He wore a suit that was slightly too shiny and carried a leather bag that looked more like a prop than medical equipment. "Mr. Sullivan, Monica," said, her voice dropping into that condescending register she used for children and waiters. "This is Dr. Thorne. He is a friend of ours. He just wants to have a little chat with you to make sure you are feeling your best." I looked at Dr. Thorne. He offered me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a shark's smile, all teeth and no warmth. "Good morning, Gerald," he said, stepping into my personal space. "I just want to check your vitals. Standard procedure for a man of your age." I let my head loll slightly to the side. I let my mouth hang open just a fraction of an inch. I didn't answer him. I just stared at his tie, a garish paisley pattern that offended my sense of symmetry. Before the doctor could even open his bag, a sharp, pungent smell hit my nose. It was unmistakable. Mercaptan, the chemical additive in natural gas. It was faint at first, then suddenly overwhelming. Monica gasped. She brought her hand to her mouth in a theatrical display of shock. She ran toward the kitchen, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood. "Oh my God," she screamed. The gas is on!" She rushed back into the living room a moment later, her eyes wide with fake terror. "Brandon, your father left the stove on again. He left the burners wide open. He is going to kill us all." She turned to the doctor, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You see, doctor, this is what we deal with every day. He forgets. He is dangerous. If we hadn't been here, the whole house would have exploded." I sat there, my internal monologue analyzing the physics of her lie. I hadn't been in the kitchen since 4 a.m. I hadn't touched the stove. The gas smell was localized fresh. She had turned it on seconds before the doctor arrived. It was a crude trap, a setup designed to provide immediate, tangible proof of my incompetence. Brandon shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Dad, why did you do that? We talked about this. You can't use the stove anymore." I decided to play my card. I looked up at them, blinking slowly, my eyes watering from the fumes she had released. "I didn't do it," I mumbled, my voice deliberately shaky. "I wanted tea." Dr. Thorne nodded, scribbling something furiously on his notepad. Forgetfulness. Dangerous behavior. Lack of awareness. It was all going into the report. "Let us sit down, Gerald," the doctor said, pulling a chair directly in front of me. He sat knee to knee with me, invading my space. He took out a penlight and shone it in my eyes. I flinched. "I am going to ask you a few simple questions," he said. "Just answer the best you can." "Do you know what year it is?" "It is the year you lose your medical license," I thought. But out loud I said nothing. I just looked at my hands. "Can you tell me the name of the current president?" he asked. I remained silent. I picked at a loose thread on my cardigan. Dr. Thorne looked at Monica and nodded. Verbal unresponsiveness. "Tell me, Gerald, do you remember signing some papers for your son yesterday? Important papers about the house?" This was the hook. He was trying to establish a baseline that I had signed the power of attorney, or that I had forgotten signing it, which would validate their claim that I was incompetent either way. It was a binary trap. I looked at Brandon. He was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed, watching me like a vulture, waiting for the animal to stop twitching. "I don't remember," I whispered. "Excellent," the doctor muttered, writing it down. "Memory loss regarding legal transactions." He reached into his bag and pulled out a blood pressure cuff. As he leaned in to wrap it around my arm, I saw a folder in his bag. The edge of a document was visible. It was a capacity declaration form. It was already filled out. He hadn't even finished the exam, and the verdict was already written. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost broke my cover. They weren't just stealing my house. They were stealing my identity. They were erasing me. I needed to end this. I needed them to believe I was not just confused, but physically deteriorating. I needed to be so pathetic, so difficult, that they would underestimate me completely. Monica walked over holding a mug of hot water. "Here, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with poison sweetness. "You said you wanted tea. Let me help you." She held the mug out to me. It was steaming. It was hot. Perfect. I reached out with my right hand. I am right-handed. My grip strength is still in the 90th percentile for my age group. I could crush a walnut. But in that moment, I summoned a tremor. I started my hand shaking a low-frequency vibration that traveled up my arm. I reached for the handle. My fingers brushed it, then spasmed. I swiped my hand sideways, hitting the mug. The hot water went flying. It didn't hit me. It didn't hit the floor. It arced through the air in a perfect parabola and splashed directly onto the crotch of Dr. Thorne's shiny, cheap trousers. The reaction was immediate. Dr. Thorne leaped out of his chair, letting out a yelp that was extremely undignified. "You crazy old bat!" he shouted, forgetting his bedside manner entirely. He frantically brushed at his pants, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "It is boiling." Monica dropped the act. She glared at me with pure hatred. "Look what you did, you clumsy idiot." I shrank back into my chair, pulling my knees up, covering my face with my hands. I started to make a low, keening sound like a frightened animal. "I was sorry. I am sorry. My hands, they don't work." Dr. Thorne was dancing around the living room trying to pull the wet fabric away from his skin. "This is impossible," he spat at Brandon. "You didn't tell me he was violent. You didn't tell me he was a physical threat. He is not violent. He is just—" "Gone," Brandon said, trying to salvage the situation. "Doctor, please. We need that signature. This just proves he needs to be in a facility. He can't feed himself. He is a danger." Dr. Thorne grabbed his bag. He looked at me with eyes full of malice. "Oh, I will sign it. I will certify him right now. He belongs in a lockdown unit. I am going to recommend immediate placement. High security. He shouldn't be loose." He marched to the dining table, slammed his clipboard down, and signed the document with a flourish of angry ink. "There," he said, ripping the page off. "Take this to the judge. Take this to the bank. He is incompetent. He is physically degenerating. Get him out of here." He stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. Silence descended on the living room. Monica picked up the paper. She looked at it, and a slow smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a predator who has just felt the trap snap shut. She walked over to Brandon and handed him the paper. "We got it," she whispered. "It is done." Brandon looked at the paper, then at me. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who had just escaped a firing squad. "Well, Dad," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "it looks like the doctor agrees with us. You are not well." Monica laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Look at him, Brandon. He is sitting there shaking. He probably doesn't even know who we are right now. It is sad, really. But at least now we can stop pretending." She walked over to the window and pulled out her phone. "I am calling the realtor," she said. "Tell them to prep the listing. We are going live for the open house tomorrow. And call the cleaning crew. I want this place scrubbed. It smells like old people and gas." Brandon nodded. He looked at me one last time. "You brought this on yourself, old man," he muttered. "If you had just signed the papers, we could have done this the easy way." He turned and followed Monica into the kitchen. I heard them high-five. I heard the refrigerator door open. They were getting champagne. They were celebrating the end of Gerald Sullivan. I sat in my chair, my hands covering my face. Underneath my palms, my expression was not one of fear or confusion. My eyes were dry, my jaw was set. I stopped shaking. I listened to them pop the cork. I listened to them toast to their new fortune. They thought they had the golden ticket. They thought the piece of paper in Brandon's hand was the key to the kingdom. They had no idea that the kingdom had already been moved. They had no idea that while they were choreographing this medical farce, I had been rewriting the laws of physics that governed their world. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. Let them think I was a broken, leaking vessel. The doctor was right about one thing. I was dangerous. But not because I was losing my mind. I was dangerous because I had found it. And tomorrow, when they opened the doors to sell my home, they were going to find out exactly what happens when you try to demolish a building that still has the architect inside. The house finally fell silent around midnight. The champagne corks had stopped popping hours ago, and the boastful toasts to their future wealth had faded into the heavy rhythmic breathing of the drunk and the entitled upstairs. I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. A house is a living thing. It expands in the heat, contracts in the cold, and groans when it carries too much weight. Right now, it felt like the beams were straining under the weight of the betrayal happening under its roof. I waited until the digital clock on my nightstand read 2 in the morning. This was the witching hour, the time when deep sleep paralyzes the body. I threw off the covers and swung my legs out of bed. My joints popped a familiar staccato rhythm in the quiet room. I did not put on my slippers. I needed to feel the floor. I needed to know exactly where I was stepping to avoid the creaky board in the hallway, the one just outside the bathroom that I had been meaning to fix for 3 years. I moved through the hallway like a shadow. I was not a frail old man anymore. I was a structural engineer conducting a site inspection in hostile territory. My objective was the basement. The door to the basement was in the kitchen. I turned the handle slowly, applying upward pressure to counteract the friction of the latch. It opened without a sound. I slipped through and closed it behind me, plunging myself into absolute darkness. I did not turn on the light. Light would bleed under the door. Light would wake them. I used the small penlight I kept in my pajama pocket, shielding the beam with my hand, so it only illuminated the steps directly in front of my feet. The air down here was different. It was stale. It smelled of ozone from overheating electronics, stale pepperoni pizza, and that cloying, musky cologne Brandon insisted on marinating in. This used to be my workshop area, a place of order and precision. Now it was what Brandon called his headquarters. I reached the bottom of the stairs and swept the light across the room. It was a disaster zone. Expensive ergonomic chairs were scattered around. Whiteboards were covered in meaningless buzzwords like synergy and vertical integration written in red marker. And there, in the center of the chaos, sat his desk. It was a glass-top desk, sleek and modern, covered in a film of dust and coffee rings. In the center sat his laptop. It was asleep, the power light pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. I sat down in his chair. It groaned under my weight. I froze, waiting for a reaction from upstairs. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator. I opened the laptop. The screen flared to life, blindingly bright in the darkness. I squinted, adjusting to the glare. A password prompt stared back at me. This was the lock. And every lock has a key. I am not a hacker. I do not know how to write code or bypass firewalls, but I know people, I know patterns, and I know my son better than he knows himself. Brandon is not a complex machine. He is a system built on vanity and insecurity. People choose passwords that mean something to them or passwords that are easy to remember. Brandon would choose something that made him feel important. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried Monica's birthday. Incorrect. I tried the date of his wedding. Incorrect. I sat back, interlacing my fingers. I closed my eyes and visualized the structure of Brandon's ego. What was the load-bearing pillar of his self-worth? It wasn't his wife. It wasn't me. It was his image. He styled himself as a tech mogul, a visionary. He was obsessed with the idea of being the next Steve Jobs, even though he lacked the work ethic. I remembered a conversation we had 5 years ago. He had launched his first company, a drop-shipping business that failed in 3 months. But for those 3 months, he was unbearable. He had printed business cards. He had bought a custom license plate. The company was called Apex. I typed in Apex. Incorrect. I thought deeper. I looked around the desk for clues. There was a sticky note on the monitor that said, "Remember the vision." It was underlined 3 times. I looked at the framed photo on his desk. It wasn't of his wife. It wasn't of his family. It was a photo of him shaking hands with a minor celebrity at a tech conference in Las Vegas 2 years ago. He looked so proud in that photo. He looked like he had arrived. The conference was in 2022. I tried Vegas 2022. Incorrect. I was losing time. I could feel the minutes ticking away. If I got locked out, I would leave a digital footprint. He would know I had been here. I took a breath. I stopped thinking like a father and started thinking like an engineer. When a system fails, it usually fails at the point of least resistance. Brandon was lazy. He hated complexity. He reused things. I remembered when I set up the Wi-Fi for him when he moved back in. He had complained about the default password being too hard to remember. He had asked me to change it to something simple. He had told me to change it to the name of his first dog, a golden retriever we had when he was 10. He loved that dog more than he loved any human. The dog's name was Buster. I typed in Buster. Incorrect. I paused. Brandon thought he was clever. He would add a number. He would add a symbol. He would follow the basic requirements for password strength, but do the bare minimum. I typed Buster 1. Incorrect. I typed Buster 1. The screen flashed. The lock icon unlocked. The desktop appeared. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. I was in. I didn't waste time looking at his browser history. I didn't care about his secrets. I cared about his intentions. I opened his email client. The inbox was a testament to a life spiraling out of control. There were hundreds of unread messages, past due notices from credit card companies, angry emails from former business partners threatening legal action, notifications from gambling websites offering him free credits to come back and lose more. But I wasn't looking for the noise. I was looking for the signal. I went to the search bar. I typed in the word house. Dozens of emails appeared. Most were from Monica discussing listing prices and staging companies. But one email stood out. It wasn't from Monica. It was from a sender identified only as V Capital. The subject line was simply collateral. I opened it. The email was dated 3 days ago. Mr. Sullivan, the email read, "We are growing impatient. You assured us that the deed transfer would be completed by the end of the week. The funds totaling $250,000 were released to your offshore account based on the guarantee of the property at 4208 Evergreen Terrace." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. He had already taken the money. He hadn't just planned to sell the house. He had already spent the value of it. I continued reading. Per our agreement, this is a hard money loan with a monthly interest rate of 20%. Since you have failed to provide the updated title reflecting your ownership, we are initiating the default clause. You have 48 hours to produce the deed, or the full amount plus penalties is due immediately. If you cannot pay, we will be forced to collect via alternative means. Vinny does not like to be kept waiting. Vinny. The name hung on the screen like a threat carved into the glass. This wasn't a bank. Banks don't send emails like this. Banks don't charge 20% monthly interest. This was organized crime. This was a loan shark. I scrolled down to the attachment. It was a loan agreement poorly drafted but legally binding in the way that matters to criminals. There was my address, my home, listed as the primary asset securing a loan for $250,000. And there was Brandon's signature. He had bet my life. He had gambled my home on some scheme or perhaps just to pay off other debts, and now the walls were closing in. I sat back in the chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. The desperation, the rush to get the doctor, the aggression. He wasn't just greedy, he was terrified. He was a man with a gun to his head, and he was trying to use me as a human shield. If he didn't get the house in his name within 48 hours, this man named Vinny was going to come for him. And if Brandon couldn't pay, Vinny would come for the collateral. He would come for my house. I looked at the timestamp on the email. The 48 hours were almost up. The deadline was tomorrow at noon. That was why the open house was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. That was why everything had to happen now. He needed to show Vinny the title. He needed to prove he owned the asset so he could keep the wolves at bay for another month. I felt a wave of nausea. My son had sold me out for temporary safety. He was willing to throw me into a facility, drug me into oblivion, and strip me of everything I had built just to cover his own mistakes. I looked at the screen one last time. I needed a copy of this. I needed proof. I couldn't print it. The noise of the printer would wake them. I couldn't forward it to myself. He might see the sent items. I pulled out my burner phone, the one I kept for emergencies, in the garage. I took photos of the screen. I took pictures of the email, the sender address, the loan agreement, the signature. I captured every pixel of his betrayal. Then I did something the engineer in me demanded. I cleaned the site. I closed the email. I cleared the recent items list. I returned the window to the exact size and position it was in when I found it. I wiped the keyboard with the sleeve of my cardigan to remove the oils from my fingertips. I adjusted the chair height back down 1/4 of an inch, exactly where it had been. I stood up in the darkness. The basement felt colder now. It felt like a tomb. I walked back up the stairs, placing my feet on the edges of the treads where the wood was strongest and least likely to creak. I slipped through the kitchen door. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the photos on my phone. The glow of the screen lit up my face. I was no longer just sad. I was no longer just disappointed. I was resolved. Brandon thought he was playing a game of chess. He thought he was 3 moves ahead. He didn't realize he was playing against the man who taught him the rules. He didn't realize that while he was trying to capture my pawns, I was preparing to tip over the entire board. He had 48 hours. I checked my watch. It was now 2:15 a.m. I had less than 10 hours before the open house. 10 hours to execute the transfer. 10 hours to build a fortress around my property that neither Brandon nor Vinny could penetrate. I lay down, but I did not close my eyes. I stared into the dark, formulating the sequence of events. The transfer. The trust. The reveal. I would save my house, but I would not save my son. He had made a deal with the devil, and tomorrow when the devil came to collect, I would make sure Brandon was the only one standing there to meet him. The sun rose on Wednesday morning with a cruel gray indifference. It was the kind of light that exposed every dust mote, every crack in the plaster, and every lie that had been festering in my home. I had not slept since discovering the email from the loan shark in the basement. My mind was a schematic drawing and redrawing lines of defense, calculating load capacities, and identifying the point of catastrophic failure. That point was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a hangover and a terror so deep it made his hands shake as he held his coffee mug. I walked into the kitchen at 7 in the morning. I was wearing my bathrobe, shuffling my feet, playing the part of the confused geriatric they so desperately needed me to be. But under the robe, my muscles were tense, coiled like steel springs. I looked at Brandon. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of old parchment, and there were dark, bruised circles under his eyes. He wasn't looking at his phone today. He was staring at the wall, his leg bouncing up and down in a rhythm of pure anxiety. Monica was there too, standing by the window, her arms crossed tight across her chest. She wasn't wearing her realtor blazer today. She was wearing a tracksuit, ready for action, ready to move boxes, ready to clear out the debris of my life. When I entered the room, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. There was no good morning. There was no offer of breakfast. Brandon simply reached into a folder on the table and pulled out a document. It was the same power of attorney form, smoothed out, waiting for ink. He slammed his hand down on top of it. The sound echoed through the silent kitchen like a gunshot. "Sign it," he said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all the fake warmth he had plastered on over the last few weeks. There was no more dad, no more buddy. There was just a man with a gun to his head looking for a hostage to trade. I looked at the paper, then at him. I let my hand tremble as I reached for a chair. I sat down slowly, letting out a small, pained sigh. I asked him why he was shouting. I asked him if we could just have some coffee and talk about this later. Brandon stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward. He didn't pick it up. He leaned over the table, invading my space, his breath smelling of stale alcohol and fear. "We do not have time for coffee," he screamed. "We do not have time to talk. You are going to pick up that pen and you are going to sign this document right now." I shrank back, widening my eyes. I played the fear, but I was also studying him. I saw the dilation of his pupils. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was survival. Vinny's deadline was ticking down in his head like a bomb. He had 24 hours left before the loan shark came for his collateral or his kneecaps. Monica stepped forward. She didn't shout. She was colder, more precise. She placed a pen on top of the paper. "Gerald," she said, her voice flat. "We are done playing games. Dr. Thorne called us this morning. He filed a report with the county. He stated that you were violent during the examination yesterday. He stated that you attacked him with boiling water." I looked down at the table. I mumbled that it was an accident. I said my hand slipped. "It doesn't matter what you say," Monica cut in. "What matters is the report. We have grounds to have you involuntarily committed for a 72-hour psychiatric hold. We have a bed reserved at Shady Pines. The transport van is on standby." Shady Pines. I knew the place. It was a warehouse for the unwanted, a place where they medicated people into vegetables to keep the noise down. Brandon leaned closer. His face was inches from mine. "Listen to me, old man. You have two choices. Option A is you sign this paper voluntarily. You give us control. We sell the house, we pay off the debts, and we set you up in a nice private apartment. We hire a nurse. You live out your days in comfort." He paused, swallowing hard. "Option B," he hissed. "You refuse. The van comes at noon. They strap you to a gurney. They take you away. And while you are locked up, I get an emergency court order based on Dr. Thorne's report. I get the house anyway. But in that version, you never come out. You die in that facility, Dad. Alone." I looked into my son's eyes. I searched for a trace of the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I searched for the young man I had bailed out of trouble time and time again. I looked for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of conscience. There was nothing. Just a black hole of desperation. He was terrified of Vinny, yes. But he was willing to sacrifice me to save himself. He was willing to erase my existence to cover his own mistakes. In that moment, the last tether of paternal obligation snapped. I had spent the night wondering if I should save him. I had the money in my secret accounts. I could have written a check for $250,000 and made Vinny go away. I could have saved his legs. I could have saved his life. But looking at him now, realizing he was threatening me with a life sentence in a psychiatric ward, I decided. I would not save him. I would let him fall. I would let the consequences of his life crush him. But I needed to be smart. If I said no right now, he might get violent. He was desperate enough to hurt me. He was desperate enough to forge my signature right in front of me and call it done. I needed to de-escalate. I needed to buy time to execute the transfer I had planned in the basement. I needed to get to 2 a.m. I let my shoulders slump. I let a tear leak out of my eye. It wasn't hard. The grief of losing a son is a powerful thing, even when the sun is standing right in front of you. I looked at the pen. I reached for it, my hand shaking violently. I held it over the paper. Brandon stopped breathing. He was watching the tip of the pen like a starving dog watching a piece of meat. I dropped the pen. I can't, I whispered. I can't do it right now. I feel sick. My chest hurts. Brandon slammed his fist on the table. For God's sake, just sign it, please. I begged, looking up at him. Please, son, just give me one night. Just one night to say goodbye to the house. This is where your mother died. This is where we lived our whole lives. I just need to process it. I promise I will sign it tomorrow morning. First thing. Just let me have one last night in my home. Brandon looked at Monica. They exchanged a silent conversation. They were doing the math. The deadline was tomorrow at noon. If I signed at 8 a.m., they could still fax the title transfer to Vinny before the deadline. It was tight, but it was doable. And they didn't want a fight. They didn't want the neighbors seeing a struggle. They didn't want the police involved if I started screaming when the van arrived. They wanted the path of least resistance. Monica sighed. Fine, she said. One night. But Gerald listened to me. She leaned down, her perfume cloying and thick. We are locking the doors. We are taking the keys. We are disconnecting the internet router. You are not leaving this house. And tomorrow at 8 a.m., if that signature isn't on this paper, I make the call, and you will spend the rest of your life in a room with padded walls. Do you understand? I nodded slowly. I understand, I whispered. Just one night. Brandon grabbed the paper and the pen. He looked at me with disgust. You are pathetic, he muttered. You used to be strong. Now look at you. He didn't know how right he was. I used to be strong, but I was never this dangerous. He walked out of the kitchen. Monica followed him. I heard them locking the front door. I heard them taking the keys from the hook in the hallway. I heard them unplugging the main router in the living room. They were thorough. They thought they had cut off all my escape routes. They thought they had isolated the target. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after they left the room. I listened to them go upstairs. I listened to them arguing in hushed tones. Brandon was panicking about the time. Monica was assuring him it was fine, that the old man was broken, that I had given up. I stood up slowly. I poured the cold coffee into the sink. I washed the cup. I dried it. I placed it in the cabinet. I was not broken. I was structural steel. I was designed to carry the load. They had given me exactly what I needed. They had given me the cover of night. They had given me a deadline. They thought they were granting a prisoner a last meal. In reality, they were giving the saboteur time to plant the explosives. I spent the day in my room lying on the bed pretending to sleep. Every time they checked on me, I kept my eyes closed. I conserved my energy. I ran the plan through my mind over and over again. The timing had to be perfect. The execution had to be flawless. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my bedroom floor, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. There was only the mission. My son wanted the house. He wanted it so badly, he was willing to destroy me for it. Well, he was going to get his wish. He was going to see the deed transfer. He was going to see the ownership change. But he was going to learn the hardest lesson of his life. He was going to learn that you never ever try to steal from the man who built the fortress. Night fell. The house went quiet. I waited for the witching hour. I waited for 2 a.m. The house was locked down. The phone lines were dead. The internet was cut. To anyone looking in, I was a senile old man trapped in a fortress of my own making, guarded by a loving son who was just trying to keep me safe. To me, I was a prisoner of war, and I had exactly 10 hours to execute a jailbreak that would leave my captors destitute. I waited until I heard the heavy rhythmic snoring of Brandon from the guest room upstairs. Monica was a lighter sleeper, so I had to be careful. I didn't turn on any lights. I navigated my bedroom by memory, counting my steps to the window that overlooked the backyard. The rain had started again, a soft, relentless drizzle that masked the sound of the window sliding up in its track. I didn't climb out. I wasn't that young anymore. Instead, I reached into the flower box outside the window. Buried beneath the soil of the dead geraniums was a small waterproof box. Inside was a key. Not to the house, but to the padlock on the metal tool chest in the garage. I slipped the key into my pocket and moved to the bedroom door. I opened it, slowly wincing at the small squeak of the hinge. The hallway was empty. I moved past the stairs, past the kitchen, where the ghost of their threats still lingered, and into the mudroom that connected to the garage. The garage was cold. It smelled of motor oil and sawdust, the scent of a life spent building things. My workbench was along the far wall, covered in tools I hadn't used in years but kept meticulously clean. Underneath the bench was the red metal tool chest. It was heavy, solid, reliable, just like me. I knelt down my knees, protesting on the cold concrete. I used the key from the flower box to open the bottom drawer. It was filled with old rags, sandpaper, and cans of WD-40. I reached all the way to the back, feeling for a false bottom I had installed 5 years ago, right after Patricia died. I had told myself it was for important documents for cash in case of an earthquake. But maybe deep down I knew a day like this would come. I pulled out a small black pouch. Inside was a burner phone. A simple prepaid flip phone with no GPS, no internet, and a battery that lasted a week. I had bought it with cash at a convenience store 3 years ago and kept it charged just in case. I flipped it open. The screen glowed a dull green. 3 bars of signal. I didn't call the police. The police were a blunt instrument. I needed a scalpel. I dialed a number I had memorized decades ago. It rang once, twice. Then a gravelly voice answered. "Sullivan, you're calling late. Someone dead. Leonard Katz, my lawyer, my friend, the only man in Seattle who hated losing more than I did." "Not yet," I whispered into the phone. "But they're trying." "Who is they?" Leonard asked. His voice shifted instantly from sleepy to sharp. I could hear the rustle of sheets, the click of a lamp turning on. "Brandon and Monica. They forged a power of attorney. They're trying to commit me. They have a doctor who's falsifying a report." "Cute," Leonard grunted. "Standard playbook. What's the asset?" "The house. And they've already leveraged it. Hard money loan. $250K. Due tomorrow at noon." I heard the sound of a lighter flicking, then the slow inhale of a cigar. Leonard didn't smoke in the house, which meant he was already moving to his office. Okay, he said, exhaling smoke. So we have fraud, elder abuse, and predatory lending. I can get an injunction, but the courts don't open until 9. If the loan is due at noon, they'll move fast. They'll try to transfer title the second the recorder's office opens. I can't wait for an injunction, Leonard, I said. I'm locked in. They cut the lines. They're watching me. So what's the play, Moo? The trust, I said. The Patricia Sullivan Memorial Trust. It's still active, right? Dormant but active. Why? I want to transfer the deed. Tonight. Now. There was a pause. You want to move the asset into an irrevocable trust at 3 a.m., Gerald. Once it's in there, it's gone. You lose control. It becomes a fortress, but you're locking yourself out too. I don't care, I said. If I own it, they can take it. If the trust owns it, it's untouchable. I need you to prep the digital transfer documents. I need you to be the witnessing notary remotely. Can you do it? I can do it, Leonard said. But you need a second witness. And you need a secure connection. A flip phone won't cut it for the digital signature. I have the connection, I said, thinking of the laptop in the workshop. I need Sam. Sam, the IT kid. Yes, call him. Tell him code red. Tell him I need him to remote into the workshop server and open a secure tunnel. I need him to verify the IP logs to prove I'm the one making the transfer, not some hacker. I need a digital trail so clean it shines. He'll do it, Leonard said. He owes you for that tuition help. Good. Set it up. I'm going to the workshop. I'll be online in 10 minutes. Gerald, Leonard said, his voice softening for the first time. You know this burns the bridge with Brandon, right? Once you do this, there's no going back. He goes down for fraud. Hard. I looked at the tools on my workbench. Hammers, saws, drills, instruments of creation, instruments of destruction. He made his choice, Leonard, I said. He bet the house. I'm just calling the bluff. See you in 10, Leonard said. The line went dead. I closed the phone and slipped it into my pocket. I stood up, my knees aching, but my mind clear. I was not a victim. I was a man preparing for a controlled demolition. I moved to the side door of the garage that led to the backyard. I cracked it open. The rain was heavier now. I pulled my cardigan tight around me and stepped out into the wet grass. The workshop was 50 feet away, a dark shape against the fence. I reached the door and slipped inside. The smell of cedar welcomed me again. I went to the cabinet, opened the drawer, and pulled out the old laptop. I booted it up. The screen flickered, then stabilized. I connected to the hidden network. A chat window popped up on the screen. It was Sam. Mr. Sullivan, Leonard called. I'm in. Secure tunnel established. Encryption is active. Nobody sees this but us. I typed back. Thank you, Sam. Are we ready? Ready, Sam replied. Leonard is uploading the deed transfer documents to the portal now. I've set up a dual-factor authentication routed to your burner phone. You'll get a code. Enter it, sign, and the property is gone. A new window opened. It was a video call from Leonard. He was sitting in his home office wearing a silk robe and smoking a cigar the size of a baton. He looked like a mob boss, which in a legal sense he was. Gerald, he said, his voice tinny through the laptop speakers. You look like hell. I feel like it, I said. Let's do this. All right, Leonard said. I'm pulling the title from the county database. Clean title. No liens recorded yet, which means the loan shark hasn't filed his paperwork. He's holding the note personally. That's good. It means we beat him to the record. He shared his screen. I saw the document. Quitclaim deed. Grantor Gerald Sullivan. Grantee, the Patricia Sullivan Memorial Trust. Read it, Leonard said. Make sure you understand. You are transferring fee simple ownership. You retain a life estate, meaning you can live there until you die, but you cannot sell, mortgage, or transfer the property. The trust owns it, and the trust's beneficiary is the Seattle Feline Rescue Society. I smiled. Brandon hated cats. It's perfect, I said. Okay, Leonard said. I'm initiating the signature sequence. Check your burner. My flip phone buzzed in my pocket. I opened it. A 6-digit code. I typed the code into the laptop. Identity verified. The screen flashed. Now sign, Leonard said. I used the trackpad to trace my signature. I made sure it was perfect. The loop of the G was tight. The S was sharp. The pressure was even. It was the signature of a man in full command of his faculties. Signed, I said. Witnessed, Leonard said, stamping his digital notary seal on the document. Submitting to King County Recorder's Office. Now. We watched the progress bar. It crawled across the screen. 20%, 50%, 80%. Come on, I whispered. Processing, the screen said. And then recording successful. Instrument number 2024. Time 02:14:33 a.m. It's done, Leonard said through a cloud of smoke. The house is gone. It belongs to the cats now. I sat back in the chair. The tension that had been holding me together for 24 hours suddenly released, leaving me feeling hollow and light. What now? I asked. Now you wait, Leonard said. Go back inside. Get some sleep. Tomorrow let them put on their show. Let them bring the buyers. Let them think they've won. And when the moment is right, you drop the hammer. And Brandon? I asked. Brandon is going to have a very bad day, Leonard said. Sam is already tracing the IP of the loan shark's email. We're building a packet for the FBI. By tomorrow afternoon, your son won't just be homeless. He'll be a federal case. Thank you, Leonard, I said. Thank you, Sam. Don't thank us yet, Leonard said. The hard part is watching him fall. Good luck, Gerald. The screen went black. I closed the laptop. I put it back in the drawer. I walked back to the house in the rain. I was soaked, cold, and exhausted. But I felt cleaner than I had in years. I crept back into the house, locked the garage door, and returned to my bedroom. I took off my wet clothes and hid them in the back of the closet. I put on dry pajamas. I got into bed. I listened to the house. It felt different now. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the memory of my wife and to a future where my son couldn't hurt me. I closed my eyes. Upstairs, Brandon was sleeping, dreaming of his millions. He didn't know that he was already bankrupt. He didn't know that the floor had been cut out from under him, and he was just hovering in the air, waiting for gravity to notice. I waited for the morning. I waited for the open house. I waited for the look on his face when he realized he had tried to rob a vault that was already empty. The digital clock on the workbench flickered to 2:00 a.m. The silence in the workshop was absolute, broken only by the hum of the old laptop's cooling fan, which sounded like a jet engine in the stillness. I sat on the stool, my back rigid, staring at the screen that was my only portal to salvation. The air around me smelled of sawdust and cold concrete, but on the screen, the sterile white glow of the legal portal looked like a hospital operating room. I was about to perform surgery on my own life. Leonard's face was a pixelated blur in the corner of the screen, wreathed in cigar smoke. He was not talking now. He knew the stakes. He had opened the secure channel to the county recorder's database, a backdoor that only seasoned attorneys and title officers knew how to navigate at this hour. Sam, the invisible ghost in the machine, had stabilized the connection, routing us through 3 different servers to ensure that if Brandon ever hired a forensic accountant, the trail would lead them into a digital maze with no exit. I looked at the blank form on the screen. It was the template for the trust creation. This was the first step. Before I could move the house, I had to build the vault. I typed in the name I had chosen hours ago, the name that would stand as a monument to everything I had lost, and everything I was fighting to protect. The Patricia Sullivan Legacy Trust. I moved the cursor to the classification drop-down menu. There were options for revocable and living trusts, the kind people use to avoid probate taxes. I scrolled past them. I needed something stronger. I needed armor. I selected irrevocable. The screen flashed a warning box. Are you sure an irrevocable trust cannot be altered, amended, or terminated by the grantor once executed? You will lose all ownership rights to the assets placed within. I clicked yes. I didn't want ownership rights. I wanted to sever the limb to save the body. Next came the trustee designation. This was the key. If I named myself trustee, Brandon could argue I was incompetent and take over as successor. If I named a friend, Brandon could sue them. I needed a ghost. I typed in the name of a shell corporation. Leonard controlled a faceless entity registered in Delaware that existed solely to hold assets in stasis. Stonewall Management LLC. Then came the clauses. I typed them out slowly, my engineer's brain treating the legal language like code. Clause 4A. The grantor retains a lifetime right of occupancy. That was for me. It meant I could live in the house until my heart stopped beating, and no one, not a landlord, not a bank, and certainly not a son with a gambling debt, could evict me. Clause 4B. This was the weapon. This was the landmine I was burying under the front porch. I called it the poison pill in my head, but on the screen I typed it out as the encumbrance of unauthorized alienation. I drafted the text carefully. It stated that any attempt to sell mortgage lien or transfer the property without the express written notarized consent of the trustee and the beneficiary would trigger an immediate liquidation event. And here was the kicker. I set the liquidation beneficiary. I didn't choose a distant relative. I didn't choose the state. I chose the one thing Brandon hated more than hard work. I chose the Seattle Feline Rescue Society. Brandon was allergic to cats. He despised them. If he tried to sell this house, if he tried to forge a signature on a deed, the title would automatically cloud, and the equitable interest would transfer instantly to the cats. He wouldn't get a dime. Vinny wouldn't get a dime. The house would essentially self-destruct into a charitable donation. I reviewed the document. It was cold. It was ruthless. It was perfect. I hit save. The document generated a unique hash ID. Now came the second step, the deed transfer. I opened the new window. This was the quitclaim deed. This was the document that would take the property out of the name Gerald Sullivan and place it into the steel jaws of the trust I had just created. I filled in the parcel number. I filled in the legal description of the land. I looked at the line for grantor. I typed my name. I looked at the line for grantee. I typed the Patricia Sullivan Legacy Trust. My finger hovered over the trackpad. This was it. The moment of no return. Once I signed this, I was technically a pauper. I would own nothing but my clothes and my checking account. I was stripping myself of my wealth to keep it from being stolen. It was a terrifying sensation, like jumping off a cliff hoping the parachute you packed yourself would open. I looked out the dusty window of the workshop. I could see the dark outline of the main house. Brandon and Monica were in there sleeping in the guest room, probably dreaming of the listing price. They had no idea that the ground beneath them was shifting. They had no idea that the asset they were banking on was evaporating into the digital ether. I nodded to Leonard on the screen. He nodded back. He initiated the digital notary session. A box appeared on my screen asking for my biometric authentication. I held my thumb against the sensor on the burner phone Sam had linked to the laptop. It beeped. Identity verified. A signature line appeared on the laptop screen. I didn't use a stylus. I used my finger on the trackpad. I traced my name slowly. Gerald. I made sure the loops were crisp. I made sure the pressure was even. I wanted this signature to be the cleanest, most undeniable thing I had ever written. I wanted a forensic handwriting analyst to look at this 10 years from now and say, that was written by a man in full command of his faculties. That was written by a man with ice in his veins. I clicked sign. Then came the waiting. A progress bar appeared in the center of the screen. Submitting to King County Recorder's Office electronic portal. The bar was gray. It didn't move. I held my breath. The workshop router was old. The connection was routed through a VPN and a proxy server. It was slow. The bar jumped to 10%. I heard a noise outside. A twig snapping. I froze. I killed the penlight. I sat in the darkness, the blue light of the loading bar reflecting in my eyes. I looked at the door. Had Brandon woken up? Had he seen the light from the workshop window? I waited. Nothing happened. It was just the wind or maybe a raccoon. But my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. If he walked in here right now, if he saw the screen, he would smash the laptop. He would pull the plug. He would kill the transfer before it cleared. I looked back at the screen. 20%. Come on, I whispered. Move. The little spinning wheel next to the bar seemed to mock me. It was taking too long. The county server must be doing a maintenance cycle. Or maybe Sam's secure tunnel was choking on the encryption. 40%. I thought about Vinny. I thought about the email. 48 hours. If this didn't go through tonight, Brandon would wake up, force me to sign the paper and fax it to Vinny. And then Vinny would file a lien. If Vinny filed a lien before I filed the transfer, the lien would attach to the house. The trust would be worthless because it would inherit the debt. It was a race. A race between a digital packet of data and the sunrise. 60%. I wiped my sweaty palms on my pajama pants. I thought about Patricia. I wondered what she would think of this. Her husband hiding in a shed, giving away their home to a legal fiction to spite their son. She would probably be heartbroken. But she was the one who told me to protect him. And the only way to protect him from Vinny was to take away the bait. If he didn't have the house, Vinny wouldn't kill him for the house. He might break his legs for the cash, but he wouldn't kill him for an asset he couldn't touch. In a twisted way, I was saving his life. 80%. The bar turned yellow. Connection unstable. Retrying. Panic flared in my chest. No. No. I looked at the router in the cabinet. The green light was flickering. It was losing the signal from the main house extender. They must have unplugged something upstairs, or maybe the storm clouds were interfering. I grabbed the laptop. I needed to get closer to the house. I needed a stronger signal. But if I went outside, I risked being seen. I had no choice. I opened the workshop door. The cold rain hit me instantly. I didn't feel it. I crouched low, hugging the laptop to my chest to shield it from the water. I crept along the side of the garage, moving toward the back patio. I watched the Wi-Fi indicator on the screen. 1 bar. 2 bars. The yellow warning disappeared. The progress bar turned green again. Resuming upload. I crouched behind the hydrangeas, shivering in the wet grass, staring at the screen. 90%. 95. 99. The bar stalled. It hung there at the very end, a hair's breadth from completion. It sat there for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a lifetime. And then the screen flashed. A green checkmark appeared. Recording successful. Instrument number 2024. Timestamp 02:14:33 a.m. Status recorded. Owner of record, the Patricia Sullivan Legacy Trust. I slumped against the siding of the house. The rain mixed with the sweat on my face. I closed the laptop. It was done. The deed was done. I didn't own 4208 Evergreen Terrace anymore. I was a guest in my own life, and Brandon was a trespasser. I crawled back to the workshop. I wiped the laptop dry. I put it back in the drawer. I locked the cabinet. I walked back across the yard, careful to step in my own footprints to mask the trail. I slipped back into the kitchen. I locked the door. I went back to my room and climbed into bed. My feet were freezing. My pajamas were damp. But I felt a warmth spreading through my chest. It was the warmth of the fuse burning down. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I visualized the county database updating. I visualized the digital record changing the name Sullivan disappearing and being replaced by the trust. It was immutable. It was permanent. It was a poison pill swallowed, digested, and waiting to take effect. I lay there and waited for the morning. I waited for the doctor. I waited for the open house. I waited for the moment when I would pull the pin and watch their world disintegrate. They wanted a show I would give them a finale they would never forget. I waited until exactly 8 o'clock before I opened my bedroom door. I had spent the last hour staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, practicing the face of a broken man. I let my shoulders slump forward, curving my spine into a question mark of defeat. I left my hair uncombed, allowing the gray strands to stand up in chaotic tufts. I didn't shave. The white stubble on my chin made me look 10 years older than I was fragile and neglected. I was no longer Gerald the engineer. I was Gerald the burden. I walked down the hallway, dragging my feet slightly so they scuffed against the carpet. It was a sound I knew would grate on Monica's nerves. The house was already buzzing with a frantic electric energy. I could hear the aggressive clatter of dishes from the kitchen and the sharp staccato rhythm of Brandon pacing the hardwood floor of the living room. When I entered the kitchen, the conversation stopped instantly. They were both dressed for business. Brandon was wearing a suit that was too tight across the shoulders, likely bought during one of his brief periods of imaginary wealth. He was sweating despite the chill of the morning. Monica was immaculate in a cream-colored dress that screamed real estate professional, her phone already glued to her hand. They looked at me like a bomb squad looks at a suspicious package. They were terrified I might explode, but they were desperate to defuse me. I didn't look at them. I shuffled to the coffee pot. It was empty. Of course it was. They hadn't made coffee for me. They had made it for themselves to fuel their conspiracy. Brandon stepped forward. He didn't offer to make a fresh pot. He didn't ask how I slept. He simply pointed to the dining room table. The document was there. It was sitting in the center of the polished mahogany surface, lonely and white. Next to it was a heavy, expensive pen. It looked like an executioner's block. "Sit down, Dad," Brandon said. His voice was tight, strained. "We don't have all day." I walked to the table slowly. I reached out and touched the back of my chair, letting my hand tremble. I looked at the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was a bruised purple. "Is this it?" I asked, my voice cracking perfectly. "Is this how it ends?" Monica sighed, a sound of pure impatience. "Don't be dramatic, Gerald. This is a new beginning. We went over this yesterday. You agreed. One night. That was the deal." I sat down. The wood of the chair felt hard against my back. I looked at the paper. Durable power of attorney. Granting Brandon Sullivan full rights to sell, convey mortgage, and liquidate real property located at 4208 Evergreen Terrace. I read the words. Yesterday they had terrified me. Today they looked like a joke written in a foreign language. They were legally sound, drafted by a lawyer, and physically real. But they referred to an asset that Gerald Sullivan no longer possessed. I looked up at Brandon. I needed to twist the knife one last time. I needed to hear the lie so I would never ever feel guilty about what was coming. "Where will I go?" I asked. "The apartment. You said it has a view." Brandon swallowed. He looked at Monica, then back at me. He licked his lips. "Yeah, Dad. It has a view. It overlooks the water. It has a balcony. And a garden. You can plant tomatoes." I knew he was lying. I knew the facility he had contacted was a converted motel off the highway. There were no balconies. There were no tomatoes. There was just industrial carpeting and the smell of bleach. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. Monica took a step closer, her eyes widening. She was holding her breath. Brandon was vibrating. I could actually see the fabric of his suit jacket trembling. He was doing the math in his head. If I signed now, he could scan it. He could email it to Vinny. He could stop the clock. I lowered the pen to the paper. I hesitated. "Just sign it," Brandon shouted, his control snapping. "Sign the damn paper." I flinched, playing the part. I let the pen hover over the signature line. I thought about the trust. I thought about the timestamp, 2:14 a.m. The house was gone. It was safe inside the digital vault of the Patricia Sullivan Legacy Trust. This piece of paper I was about to sign was a permission slip to sell a ghost. It gave him power over nothing. It was a check drawn on a closed account. I pressed the pen to the paper. The ink flowed black and smooth. I wrote my name. Gerald Sullivan. I didn't forge it. I didn't mess it up. I signed it with my real signature, the one on my driver's license, the one the bank had on file. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted there to be absolutely no doubt that I had signed this document of my own free will. When the lawyer eventually stood up in court, I wanted him to be able to say, yes, he signed the power of attorney. But the power of attorney was useless because he had already transferred the asset. I finished the loop of the N. I lifted the pen. Before I could even set it down, Brandon snatched the paper from under my hand. He didn't say thank you. He didn't look at me with relief or gratitude. He looked at the paper like a starving man looking at a feast. He held it up to the light, checking the ink. "It is done," he breathed. "Oh my God. It is done." Monica let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. She grabbed his arm. "Scan it. Right now. Send it to the title company. Send it to Vinny. We have the authority. We are the owners of record." Brandon ran to the printer in the corner of the room. He slapped the paper onto the scanner bed. I heard the whir of the machine. The digital copy was being made. The lie was being transmitted to the world. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, watching them. The transformation was instant. The fear evaporated from Brandon's face, replaced by a rush of arrogance that was almost blinding. He pulled his phone out and dialed a number. "Vinny," he barked into the phone. "Yeah, it is me. I told you I would handle it. I am emailing you the power of attorney right now. Notarized, signed, legal. The house is mine." Yeah, the open house is on. Tell your guys they can come inspect the merchandise at 2. We are listing it today." He laughed. A loud, booming sound. "Yeah, I told you the old man would fold. He knows what is good for him." He hung up and looked at Monica. "We are rich, babe. We are clear." Monica was already on her phone, pacing the kitchen. "Yes, put the listing live on Zillow. Price it aggressively. 1.8 million. Cash offers preferred. Quick close. Yes, we are doing an exclusive open house today at 2 p.m. Invite the investors list. I want a bidding war by sunset." She hung up and turned to me. Her face was flushed with victory. She didn't look at me as a person anymore. I was a piece of furniture that needed to be moved before the guests arrived. "Gerald," she said, her voice sharp and commanding, "go to your room. Pack a bag. Just the essentials. We don't want clutter. I looked at her. I am hungry, I said. Can I have some breakfast? She rolled her eyes. There is no time for breakfast. Eat an apple. We have cleaners coming in an hour to stage the house. You need to be out of the way. Actually, wait. She looked at Brandon. We can't have him wandering around during the open house. He looks like a homeless person. It will tank the value. Brandon looked at me, assessing the damage. You are right. He looks terrible. I have an idea, Monica said. The wheelchair. The one we bought when he broke his ankle 3 years ago. Is it still in the garage? Yeah, Brandon said. Why? Put him in it, she said. Stick him in the corner of the sunroom. Tell anyone who asks that he is the grandfather. He is recovering from a stroke, and he is nonverbal. It plays into the motivated seller narrative. Distressed family. Medical bills. It explains why we are selling so fast. It makes the buyers feel like they are getting a deal because we are desperate. Brandon grinned. That is brilliant. Sympathy points. I listened to them turn me into a prop. They were going to use my body to sell my house. They were going to display me like a broken antique to justify their fire sale. It was cruel. It was dehumanizing. And it was perfect. If I was in the room, I could see everything. If I was in the wheelchair, no one would suspect I was dangerous. They were giving me a front row seat to their own funeral. Fine, I mumbled. Just don't send me away yet. We won't, Brandon said, clapping me on the shoulder. His touch made my skin crawl. You sit tight, Dad. You help us sell this place and we will get you to that apartment with the view real soon. He ran out to the garage. I heard the clang of metal. He came back rolling the dusty wheelchair. Sit, he ordered. I stood up slowly. I lowered myself into the chair. It smelled of mildew. There, he said. Now stay put. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. If you open your mouth during the open house, I swear I will drive you to the shelter myself and leave you on the curb. I nodded. I slumped down, making myself look small. They ignored me after that. The next few hours were a blur of activity. A cleaning crew arrived, sweeping through the house like a hurricane. They polished the floors, they wiped the windows, they hid my personal belongings in boxes and shoved them into the closet. Monica staged the living room. She put out fresh flowers. She baked cookies she had bought from the store to make the house smell like home. She opened all the curtains to let the light in. Brandon was on the phone constantly. He was talking to investors. He was talking to his creditors. I heard him promise payments by Monday. He was spending the money before the ink was even dry on the offer. I sat in the sunroom watching the water. The view I had looked at for 40 years. The view Patricia loved. I checked my pocket. The burner phone was there. I felt the shape of it. I had set it to silent. I knew Leonard was working. I knew Sam was monitoring the county database, watching for any ping from a title company. At noon, Brandon came in with a sandwich. He threw it on my lap. Eat, he said, and try not to make a mess. I ate the sandwich. I needed the energy. At 1:30 p.m., the first cars started to arrive. Early birds, sharks circling. I saw a black SUV pull up across the street. The window rolled down. A man with a thick neck and sunglasses looked out. It was Vinny. He wasn't relying on emails anymore. He was here to make sure his investment paid off. Brandon saw him too. He waved nervously from the window. Vinny didn't wave back. He just rolled up the window and waited. Monica walked into the sunroom. She looked at me. She adjusted my collar not out of kindness, but to make me look presentable. Remember, she hissed. Not a word. You are invisible. You are a vegetable. I stared blankly ahead. "Good," she said. She walked back to the front door. She opened it wide. She put out the sign, "Open House." I took a deep breath. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The audience was arriving. They thought they were selling a house. They didn't know they were walking into a courtroom. And the judge was sitting in a wheelchair in the corner waiting to deliver the verdict. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my home had ceased to be a sanctuary and had become a theater of the absurd. The air was thick with the cloying scent of vanilla candles Monica had burned to mask the smell of old age and betrayal. The floors, usually scuffed from years of life, gleamed with a chemical shine that stung my eyes. I sat in the corner of the sunroom, strapped into the wheelchair, like a piece of broken furniture they couldn't quite fit into the closet. Monica had draped a tartan blanket over my legs, a final touch to the tableau of the invalid patriarch. I was no longer Gerald Sullivan, structural engineer. I was a prop. I was the silent, drooling justification for a fire sale. The first wave of buyers arrived with the punctuality of vultures who smell carrion. They were a mix of hungry young couples looking for a flip and hardened investors looking for a steal. They walked through my front door with muddy shoes tracking entitlement across the hardwood. I watched them from my vantage point. They didn't see me, or rather, they saw me registered my presence as a sad, non-verbal fixture and then looked right through me to evaluate the crown molding. Brandon was in the center of the living room, vibrating with an energy that was half charisma and half panic. He was wearing his tight suit, his hair gelled back, a glass of sparkling water in his hand to hide the tremor. He was putting on the performance of his life. He wasn't just selling a house. He was selling a narrative. He spoke about legacy. He spoke about opportunity. He spoke about the tragic necessity of liquidating assets to care for his beloved ailing father. He pointed toward the sunroom where I sat. He lowered his voice to a respectful, somber tone. He told them I had suffered a massive stroke. He told them I required 24-hour care in a specialized facility. He wiped a fake tear from his eye. It was masterful. If I didn't know he was planning to dump me in a motel room, I might have been moved. But the real show wasn't for the young couples. It was for the man standing by the fireplace. Vinny. The loan shark hadn't bothered with the pleasantries of a tour. He stood with his back to the wall, his arms crossed over a leather jacket that creaked every time he took a breath. He wore sunglasses indoors, a cliché that somehow made him more terrifying rather than ridiculous. He wasn't looking at the view of the Sound. He wasn't looking at the granite countertops. He was looking at Brandon. He was counting the seconds until his money materialized. Every time Brandon laughed too loud, Vinny's jaw tightened. He was the fuse on the bomb Brandon was juggling. Monica was working the room like a shark in a koi pond. She guided people away from me if they got too close, whispering about not disturbing my rest. She handed out glossy brochures she had printed that morning. She talked about price per square foot and zoning potential. She was in her element. She was devouring the attention, already spending the commission in her head. A couple in their 40s, dressed in matching beige cashmere, seemed to be the frontrunners. They were walking around, tapping on walls and looking critical. I knew the type. Investors. They didn't want a home. They wanted a rental property. They wanted to strip the character out of the house, paint everything gray, and rent it out to tech workers for $5,000 a month. Brandon zeroed in on them. He sensed the money. He ushered them into the dining room, right where the heavy mahogany table sat. The same table where I had signed the power of attorney hours before. Now it was set with a bottle of Dom Perignon and a stack of legal documents. I watched Brandon lean in. I heard him say that there were already 3 other offers on the table. I heard him say that cash was king. He was pushing for a same-day close. He was desperate to get a signature, any signature that he could show to Vinny as proof of life. The man in cashmere, let's call him Mr. Beige, nodded slowly. He looked at his wife. She whispered something about the kitchen needing a remodel. Brandon jumped in, offering a $20,000 credit at closing. He was giving away my equity to save his skin. Vinny took a step forward from the fireplace. He didn't speak, but his presence was a physical weight in the room. He tapped his watch. Brandon saw it. He flinched. He turned back to Mr. Beige and dropped the price by another $50,000. Just like that. $50,000 of my life's work vanished in a sentence because my son was terrified of the man in the leather jacket. Mr. Beige smiled. It was a greedy, predatory smile. He said they were interested. He said they were ready to move forward. Monica clapped her hands together, a sharp, piercing sound. She produced a contract from her clipboard. It was a standard purchase and sale agreement, but I knew she had added an addendum for an immediate release of earnest money. They needed cash today. They sat down at the table. The champagne was poured. The bubbles fizzed in the crystal flutes. To everyone in the room, this was a celebration. It was the seamless transition of wealth from one generation to the next, facilitated by a tragedy. I sat in my wheelchair gripping the armrests. My knuckles were white but hidden under the blanket. I felt the burner phone in my pocket against my thigh. It was heavy like a weapon. I looked around the room one last time. I looked at the pictures on the mantelpiece, photos of me and Patricia that they hadn't bothered to take down because they added to the staging. I looked at the light filtering through the windows, the same light I had woken up to for 40 years. They were drinking my wine. They were selling my floorboards. They were erasing my history. Brandon handed the pen to Mr. Beige. The investor leaned over the document. The tip of the pen touched the paper. Monica was beaming. Brandon was exhaling, his shoulders dropping as he thought he had crossed the finish line. Vinny even cracked a small, grim smile. They thought the play was over. They thought the curtain was coming down. It was time. I took a deep breath. I channeled every ounce of rage, every ounce of betrayal, and every ounce of the cold, hard logic that had built my career. I pushed the blanket off my legs. It fell to the floor in a heap of tartan wool. I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. I stood up. The movement was sudden. It was violent in its normalcy. The sound of the chair rolling backward on the hardwood floor cut through the murmur of conversation like a scream. Heads turned. The glass of champagne in Monica's hand tilted, spilling liquid onto the floor. Brandon froze. His eyes went wide, staring at me as if a corpse had just climbed out of a coffin. I didn't look at them. I walked to the center of the room. I walked with a steady, powerful gait. My spine was straight. My chin was up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen. I swiped up to cast the image to the massive 85-inch television show mounted above the fireplace right behind where Vinny was standing. The screen flickered. The slideshow of the house listing disappeared. In its place, a high-resolution PDF appeared. It was white, stark, and official. At the top, the seal of the King County Recorder's Office. Below that, the words, Certificate of Recorded Deed, and in the center, in bold black letters, Owner of Record, the Patricia Sullivan Legacy Trust. I turned to the room. I looked at the investors. I looked at Vinny. And finally, I looked at my son. I apologize for the interruption, I said, my voice booming in the silent room. But there seems to be a misunderstanding. You cannot buy this house. I pointed a finger at Brandon. Because he doesn't own it. The silence that followed my announcement was heavier than the timber beams holding up the roof. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room, leaving everyone gasping for oxygen in the sudden violent shift of reality. The 85-inch television, which moments before had been displaying a slideshow of my home's selling points, now broadcast the death certificate of my son's ambition. The timestamp on the document, 02:14:33 a.m., glowed in the upper corner like a digital accusation. Brandon was the first to break the paralysis. He lunged toward me, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like a cornered animal, realizing the cage door had been welded shut. "Dad." "Stop it," he hissed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off. You are confused. You don't know what you are doing." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood my ground, feeling the strength returning to my legs, the adrenaline flushing out the feigned frailty of the last 24 hours. "I am not confused, Brandon," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I have never been clearer. That document on the screen is a certified copy of the deed transfer I executed early this morning while you were sleeping off your premature victory. I transferred the title. I moved the asset. You are trying to sell a house that does not belong to you using a power of attorney that is legally worthless because the property it references is no longer in my name." The room erupted. It wasn't a roar. It was a chaotic murmur of confusion and outrage. The investors, the sharks in beige cashmere, looked from the screen to Brandon and back to me. They were doing the mental calculus, realizing they had walked into a trap. Mr. Beige, the man who had been seconds away from signing the contract, dropped his pen. It clattered onto the hardwood floor, a sharp, distinct sound in the murmur. He stood up, smoothing his expensive sweater, his face flushing red with embarrassment and anger. "Is this true?" he demanded, turning on Brandon. "Does the trust own this property?" Brandon stammered, waving his hands frantically. No, it is a mistake. My father he is mentally unwell. He doesn't have the capacity to create a trust. He is tricking you." I tapped my phone screen again. The image on the TV changed. It was now a video file. It was a recording of me taken in the workshop at 2 a.m. In the video, I was holding a newspaper with yesterday's date. I looked directly into the camera lens. "My name is Gerald Sullivan," the video me said. "It is 2:10 a.m. I am of sound mind and body. I am voluntarily transferring the deed of my home to the Patricia Sullivan Legacy Trust to protect my assets from the fraudulent activities of my son Brandon Sullivan and his wife Monica. Any attempt by them to sell this property is an act of fraud." The video loop ended. The room was dead silent again. "That is a deep fake," Monica shrieked. Her voice was high and thin, bordering on hysterical. She was clutching her clipboard so hard her knuckles were white. "He made it up. He doesn't know how to use a computer. He barely knows how to use the remote control." I looked at her. I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "I was a structural engineer for 40 years, Monica," I said softly. "I designed bridges that carry thousands of cars every day. Do you really think I couldn't figure out how to use a laptop because I let you set up the Roku?" Monica dropped the clipboard. It hit the floor with a loud crack. She didn't pick it up. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I knew what she was doing. She was logging into the county recorder's public database. She was looking for the official record. She needed to see it with her own eyes. She needed the system she worshipped to tell her she had lost. While she typed, I turned my attention back to the room. I looked at the investors. I looked at the curious neighbors who had wandered in. I raised my voice, projecting it to the back of the room where Vinny was standing, frozen by the fireplace. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "this open house is over. The contract you were about to sign is void. The deposit you were about to hand over would have been stolen. This house belongs to an irrevocable trust. And just so we are all prophetically clear on the details, the trust has a very specific clause regarding unauthorized sales." I swiped my phone screen again. A highlighted section of the trust document appeared on the TV. Clause 4B, encumbrance of unauthorized alienation. If any attempt is made to sell, transfer, or lien this property without the express written consent of the trustee, the equitable interest in the property shall immediately and automatically transfer to the designated charitable beneficiary, the Seattle Feline Rescue Society. I heard a snort of laughter from the back of the room. It was Vinny. He was laughing. It was a dark, mirthless sound. "You hear that, Brandon?" Vinny called out. His voice cut through the tension like a razor. "You tried to sell the house and now it belongs to the cats." Brandon spun around to face Vinny. His face was gray. "Vinny, please. I didn't know. He tricked me." I stepped forward, regaining control of the room. "You are all trespassing," I said. "This is private property owned by the trust. I am the sole tenant, and I am revoking your invitation. You have 5 minutes to leave my home before the police arrive. And believe me, they are already on their way. My lawyer called them 10 minutes ago." The word police was the trigger. The investors didn't wait for an explanation. They didn't wait for an apology. They grabbed their coats and their purses and scrambled for the door. Mr. Bage glared at Brandon as he passed, muttering something about a lawsuit. His wife looked at me with wide, frightened eyes and practically ran out onto the lawn. The room emptied in seconds. The energy of the open house evaporated, leaving only the stale smell of cheap champagne and fear. Monica was still staring at her phone. She was frozen, a statue of disbelief. Then she let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "It is here," she whispered. "It is real. Instrument number 009876. Recorded at 2:14 a.m. Grantee Patricia Sullivan, Legacy Trust." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wild. Her carefully constructed mask of professional competence had shattered, revealing the greedy, terrified child underneath. How she screamed. "How did you do this? We locked the doors. We cut the internet. We watched you." I tapped my temple. "You watched the old man, Monica. You didn't watch the engineer. You assumed the system was secure because you controlled the router. You forgot about redundancy. You forgot about the workshop. You went outside," she gasped. "In the rain, I did what was necessary," I said. "I protected what was mine." She sank to the floor. She didn't faint gracefully like they do in the movies. She just collapsed, her legs giving out under the weight of her failure. She sat amidst the spilled champagne and the dropped clipboard, staring at the floor. "He ruins everything," she muttered. "He always ruins everything. We were so close. We were going to be rich. We were going to be free." She looked at Brandon. Her eyes narrowed. "This is your fault," she spat. "You said he was senile. You said he was broken. You told me it was a sure thing." I didn't know, Brandon yelled back. He was pacing now, pulling at his hair. He looked like a man who was watching his parachute burn. "He has been playing us. The whole time. The water. The shaking hands. It was all an act." He turned to me. His eyes were red-rimmed with tears of frustration. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you do this to me? Why did you let me think I had won? Why didn't you just say no?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," I said. "If I had said no, you would have forced me. You threatened to lock me away, Brandon. You threatened to erase my life so you could pay off your gambling debts. You made your choice. You chose the money over your father. So I chose the house over my son. I didn't do it to hurt you," I added, my voice dropping. "I did it to stop you. I did it because it was the only way to break the cycle. You have been leeching off me for years. You have been stealing pieces of my life to patch the holes in yours. Well, the well is dry, son. The bank is closed." I checked my watch. "The police will be here in 3 minutes," I said. "If I were you, Monica, I would start thinking about what you are going to tell them about those credit cards you opened in my name. My lawyer has the records. He has the IP addresses. He knows about the trip to Florida." Monica went pale. She scrambled to her feet. She looked at the door, then back at me. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I would," I said. "And I did. It is already filed. Identity theft is a felony, Monica. And elder abuse adds a nice sentencing enhancement." She looked at Brandon. She looked at the door. And then, without a word to her husband, without a backward glance at the man she had conspired with, she ran. She grabbed her purse and sprinted out the front door, the heels of her shoes clacking frantically on the pavement as she fled toward her car. Coward Brandon muttered, watching her go. He turned back to me. He was alone now. The investors were gone. His wife was gone. The only people left in the room were his father, who had just disowned him, and the man in the leather jacket standing by the fireplace. Vinny hadn't moved. He hadn't run. He had watched the entire scene with a detached professional interest, like a critic watching a particularly violent play. He slowly took off his sunglasses and folded them into his pocket. He walked toward the center of the room, his boots heavy on the floorboards. I stepped back. I wasn't afraid of Brandon, but Vinny was a variable I couldn't calculate. Vinny ignored me. He walked right past me and stopped in front of Brandon. He looked at my son with a gaze that was entirely devoid of pity. So Vinny said, his voice low and rumbling, "Let me get this straight. The house is gone. The trust has it. And if you try to touch it, it goes to the cats." Brandon nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry, Vinny. I am so sorry. I will fix it. I will get the money. I just need time." Vinny sighed. He reached out and patted Brandon on the cheek. It was a gentle gesture which made it all the more terrifying. "You don't have time, kid," Vinny said. "You had 48 hours. You spent the money. You promised me a house. Now I don't have the money and I don't have the house." He leaned in close. "You know how this works, Brandon. I am a businessman. I have investors too. They don't like losing money. And they really don't like being lied to." Vinny reached into his jacket. For a second I thought he was pulling a gun. My heart hammered. I had called the police, but they weren't here yet. He pulled out a phone. He tapped the screen. "You have 24 hours, Vinny said. "Not 48. 24. Tomorrow at noon. If you don't have $250,000 in cash, I am not coming for the house. I am coming for you, and I am going to take pieces of you until the debt is paid." He put the phone away. He looked at me. He nodded respectfully. "Nice move, Pops," he said. "Respect. You played him like a fiddle." He turned and walked out the front door, stepping over the threshold as if he were leaving a casual lunch. He got into his black SUV and drove away, leaving a silence in his wake that was louder than any scream. Brandon fell to his knees. He collapsed onto the rug Monica had bought to stage the room. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was a guttural, ugly sound, the sound of a man who realizes he has dug his own grave and the dirt is starting to fall in. I looked down at him. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, the echo of the love I used to have for him. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. I wanted to write the check. But I looked at the table where the pen still lay. I looked at the wheelchair in the corner. I remembered the basement. I remembered the doctor. I hardened my heart. I poured concrete over the cracks. The sound of sirens grew loud outside. Blue and red lights flashed against the living room walls, painting us in alternating shades of judgment. I walked to the window. 2 squad cars were pulling up. Uniformed officers were getting out. I turned back to my son. "Get up," I said. "The police are here." Brandon looked up. His face was a mess of snot and tears. "Dad, help me. Please. Vinny is going to kill me. You have the money. I know you do. Just pay him. I will go to rehab. I will do anything." I shook my head. "I don't have $250,000, Brandon," I lied. "I gave it all to the trust. I am just a tenant now. I pay $1 a year. That is all I can afford." I walked to the front door to let the officers in. "You are on your own, son," I said over my shoulder. "You wanted to be the man of the house. Now you are." I opened the door to the cold afternoon air. The officers walked up the path. Mr. Sullivan, one of them asked. Yes, I said. I am Gerald Sullivan, and I would like to report a crime. To a man like Vinny, the law is not a barrier. It is merely an inconvenience. He did not care about the paperwork I had flashed on the screen. He did not care about the irrevocable nature of the trust or the charitable beneficiary. He only cared about the mathematics of his ledger. The asset he had been promised, the equity he had intended to strip from my home to cover his investment, had vanished into thin air. And in his world, when an asset disappears, a liability must be collected. He walked past me without a glance. I was of no consequence to him anymore. I was just the tenant of a property he could not touch. His focus was entirely on the man who had signed the promissory note. He stopped inches from Brandon. My son was trembling, his face slick with sweat, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit that did not exist. I still had my hand in my pocket, my fingers wrapped around the burner phone which was recording every sound in the room. The fidelity was high enough to pick up the rustle of Vinny's leather jacket as he leaned in close to my son. He did not shout. He did not make a scene. He spoke with the intimacy of a lover sharing a secret, his lips brushing Brandon's ear. You have 24 hours, Vinny whispered. The microphone picked it up clearly, a digital imprint of a death sentence. You have until noon tomorrow. If you do not have my $250,000 in cash, I am not coming for the house. I am coming for you, and I am going to take it out of your skin. Do not try to run. I will find you. Vinny stepped back. He patted Brandon on the cheek, a gesture that was both possessive and demeaning. Then he turned and walked out the front door, stepping into the afternoon light, as if he were just a guest leaving a party. He got into his black SUV and drove away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the house itself. Brandon stood frozen for a heartbeat, his eyes fixed on the empty doorway. Then the reality of his situation crashed down on him. The adrenaline that had sustained his arrogance evaporated, leaving behind only the raw terror of a man who knows he is hunted. His knees gave way. He did not sit. He collapsed. He hit the floor with a heavy, boneless thud right at my feet. He reached out and grabbed the hem of my cardigan. His hands were shaking so violently that he could barely hold the fabric. He looked up at me and I saw a face I hadn't seen in 30 years. It was the face of the 6-year-old boy who had broken a neighbor's window and was terrified of the consequences, but this time the window cost $250,000, and the neighbor was a sociopath. "Dad!" he choked out. His voice was wet and thick with tears. "Dad, please." "You heard him. He is going to kill me. He is not joking. You have the money. I know you do. You have savings. You have investments. Just pay him. Please. I will do anything. I will go to rehab. I will sign whatever you want. Just don't let him hurt me." He buried his face in my pant legs, sobbing uncontrollably. Snot and tears smeared onto the fabric. It was a pathetic, ugly display. This was the man who hours ago had stood in this very room and threatened to lock me away in a state facility until I died. This was the man who had looked me in the eye and told me I was useless. Now he was clinging to me like a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. I looked down at him. I felt the phantom ache of paternal instinct, the biological urge to protect my offspring from harm. It would be so easy. I could make a call. I could liquidate an account. I could make Vinny go away. I could be the hero one last time. But then I looked at the wheelchair in the corner. I looked at the empty spot on the wall where he had taken down my wedding photo to stage the house. I remembered the cold basement. I remembered the doctor he had hired to erase my mind. I remembered that he had not just gambled his own life. He had bet mine. He wasn't crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he had lost. He was crying because the safety net he had always relied on, the father he had taken for granted, had finally turned into concrete. I did not pull away. I did not kick him. I simply stood there immobile, looking down at the wreckage of my son. The sirens outside grew louder, a crescendo of consequences arriving to sweep up the debris. "I don't have $250,000, Brandon," I said, my voice steady and calm. I lied to him. I gave everything to the trust, every dime. I am a poor man now. I have a $1 lease and a pension. That is all. He looked up, his eyes wide with horror. "You are lying," he whispered. "You have to be lying." "I am not," I said. "You wanted to be the man of the house. You wanted control. Well, you have it. You have your debt. You have your choices. And now you are on your own." I stepped back, pulling my cardigan from his grip. He fell forward onto his hands, sobbing into the floorboards he had tried to sell. I walked to the door to let the police in. I had saved my home. I had saved my dignity. But as I watched the officers walk up the path, I knew that saving my son was the one thing I could no longer afford to do. The officers stepped into the foyer, bringing with them the sharp, clean scent of rain and authority. They didn't need to ask who was who. The tableau in the living room told the story better than any witness statement. I was the old man standing by the door, weary but upright. Brandon was the heap on the floor, sobbing into the rug. And Monica was the woman trying to vibrate through the walls to escape. "Mr. Sullivan," the lead officer said, nodding to me, "we received a call from your attorney, Mr. Katz. He forwarded us a substantial digital packet regarding forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse." Brandon looked up. His eyes were red and swollen like a child who has cried himself sick. "Officer," he choked out, "it's a misunderstanding. It's a family dispute. My father, he's confused." "I don't think he is, son," the officer said, reaching for his belt. "We have the IP logs. We have the credit card applications. And we have a statement from a Mr. Paul Hayes regarding a forged medical document." Monica let out a small squeak. She tried to edge toward the kitchen, perhaps hoping the back door was still an option. "Mrs. Sullivan," a female officer said, stepping into her path, "don't make this harder. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding 23 counts of credit card fraud." Monica's face crumbled. The mask of the high-powered realtor, the competent wife, the woman in charge, it all dissolved, leaving behind a terrified grifter. "It was him," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Brandon. "He made me do it. He needed the money for his debts. I told him to stop." "You signed the applications, ma'am," the officer said, pulling out her handcuffs. The metallic ratchet sound of them locking around Monica's wrists was the loudest thing in the room. They pulled Brandon up from the floor. He didn't fight. He was limp, a sack of wet sand. He looked at me as they cuffed his hands behind his back. His suit, so tight and arrogant hours before, now looked like a costume he had outgrown. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, please. You can't let them take me. I'm your son." I looked at him. I looked at the hands that had forged my signature. I looked at the eyes that had watched me shake with feigned palsy and felt nothing but relief. "I know who you are," I said softly. "You are the man who tried to bury me alive." "I'm sorry," he wept. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't pay the mortgage, Brandon," I said. "And it doesn't buy back trust." The officers began to lead them out. The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, peering over the hedges, their phones out, recording the downfall of the Sullivan dynasty. It was the open house Brandon had wanted, just not the audience he expected. As they reached the door, Brandon dug his heels in. He turned his head, desperate for one last lifeline. "Dad," he shouted, "I'm your boy. You taught me everything. You taught me to ride a bike. You taught me to throw a ball." I felt a crack in my chest, a hairline fracture in the concrete I had poured over my heart. I remembered that day. I remembered running behind his bicycle, holding the seat, letting go and watching him wobble, then steady himself, then fly. I had been so proud. I walked to the door. I looked him in the eye. I taught you to ride a bike, Brandon, I said, my voice steady. But I couldn't teach you how to be a man. You had to learn that on your own. And you failed. The officer guided his head down to protect it as he put him in the back of the squad car. I watched the door slam shut. I watched the lights flash against the gray sky. I stood there until the cars drove away, until the sirens faded, until the neighbors went back inside. Then I closed the front door. I locked it. I walked back into the living room. It was empty. The champagne was flat. The cookies were stale. I sat down in my armchair. The house was silent. For the first time in 40 years, I was truly alone. But as I listened to the rain tapping against the glass, I didn't feel lonely. I felt safe. The structural integrity held. The foundation was solid. I had survived the storm. 6 months later, the sun was shining in Seattle, a rare golden light that made the water of the Sound sparkle like scattered diamonds. I stood on the porch of 4208 Evergreen Terrace for the last time. The house was empty. My furniture was gone, sold, or donated. The walls were bare, the echo of my footsteps, the only sound in the rooms. I had sold the house, or rather, the trust had sold it. Leonard handled the transaction with the precision of a surgeon. We found a young couple architects who looked at the beams and the joinery with the same reverence I had felt 40 years ago. They didn't want to tear it down. They wanted to restore it. They wanted to raise a family here. The proceeds from the sale were substantial. After paying off the closing costs and Leonard's fees, the trust was flush. But I didn't need the money for a nursing home. I didn't need it for medical bills. I checked my watch. My taxi was waiting. I walked down the path, my suitcase rolling behind me. It was the only thing I was taking. I had purged 40 years of accumulation. I was traveling light. I climbed into the taxi and told the driver to take me to SeaTac International Airport. As we merged onto the highway, I watched the skyline of the city recede. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. Patricia had always wanted to go to Italy. We had talked about renting a villa in Tuscany, drinking wine, eating olives, and watching the sunset over the vineyards. We never went. Work always got in the way. Then the cancer got in the way. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was a new smartphone, not the burner I had used in the workshop. I had a ticket on my screen. One way. Seattle to Florence. The phone vibrated in my hand. I looked at the screen. Incoming call, King County Correctional Facility. It was Brandon. He called once a week. He needed money for the commissary. He needed money for a better lawyer. He needed me to tell him it wasn't his fault. I looked at the notification. I thought about the boy on the bike. I thought about the man in the kitchen threatening to lock me away. I didn't answer. I pressed the side buttons and powered the phone down. The screen went black. I popped the case open. I dug my thumbnail under the SIM card and levered it out. It was a tiny piece of plastic and silicone, a chip that connected me to a life I no longer lived. When the taxi pulled up to the departure curb, I got out. I paid the driver. I walked to a trash can outside the terminal doors. I dropped the SIM card into the bin. It landed on top of a half-eaten sandwich wrapper. I walked into the terminal. I didn't look back. People say that blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything, but they are wrong. Blood can be toxic. Family can be the anchor that drowns you. I walked toward the security checkpoint, my ticket in my hand. I was 69 years old. I had no house. I had no son. But as I stepped through the scanner, I realized something else. I had no fear. I was Gerald Sullivan. I was a structural engineer, and for the first time in a long time, I was free to build whatever I wanted. Life teaches us that the hardest betrayals often come from those we once held in our arms. I learned that unconditional love does not mean unconditional tolerance for abuse. Saving my son from his own mistakes for decades only crippled him, and in the end, the most loving thing I could do was let him face the consequences of his choices alone. Protecting my future wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of necessary survival. True freedom comes when you finally realize that you are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep someone else warm. If you enjoyed this story of justice served ice cold, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member to save yourself? Let me know your story in the comments below.